For more, we now turn to our anchor at large, Ndimyake Mwakalyelye. Ndimi.
Thank you, Vincent. Well, the landslide election victory in Zimbabwe by incumbent President Robert Mugabe has sparked allegations of vote rigging and a vow to legally challenge the results by Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai and his party.
Mugabe Robert Gabriel of ZANU-PF party has received more than half the number of votes cast in the presidential election. Mugabe Robert Gabriel of ZANU-PF party is therefore declared duly elected President of the Republic of Zimbabwe.
President Mugabe's ZANU-PF party also won more than a two-thirds majority in parliament. Mr. Tsvangirai says the elections were rigged. He is calling for restraint, fearing a repeat of bloody violence that followed a disputed vote in 2008.
Our people are disciplined people. You don't solve people by creating violence. You create, in fact, we are at this stage because of the discipline of our people. If it was any other country, they would burn down the building. They've not chosen to do that because they know at the end of the day, we don't want any violent resolution of this crisis.
Mr. Tsvangirai says his Movement for Democratic Change party has evidence the vote was rigged. The international community has also expressed concerns about the credibility of the poll. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said the United States does not believe the announced results represent a credible expression of the will of the Zimbabwean people. Now, to discuss this further, we are joined in studio by Vukasin Petrovic, Freedom House Director of Programs for Southern Africa, and by phone from Harare, Ibbo Mandaza, Executive Director of the Southern African Political Economy Series, or SAPES Trust. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mandaza. I want to come to you. You are in Harare. You're obviously seeing the election outcome unfold. The evidence that the MDC says it has, do you see it presenting it? And then what about this legal challenge that it is threatening against the system?
Yeah, I believe not only the MDC, but other civic organizations, such as VESEL, are producing a dossier which shows or proves the extent of the irregularities, not to mention the extent of the improbable outcome of the elections, especially the presidential.
Now, what has been your personal observations as this process unfolded?
Well, 5 months ago, I would have said that they would have 40 to 45% apathy. But in the last month, leading up to the election, there was such an upsurge in both the registration of new voters and in terms of the groundswell against Mugabe.
Now, I know that...
And as I said, the election ultimately was about Mugabe, ultimately, first and foremost.
Well, now, of course, allegations of irregularities have been pointed out, including by the Zimbabwe Election Support Network, which monitors elections. And coming to you now, Mr. Petrovic, I know Freedom House today did point out some irregularities and some disturbing trends in this election. But in the past, it released a survey last year predicting this outcome. So is there any credibility to that President Mugabe actually possibly has support of the Zimbabwean people?
Right. Firstly, thank you very much.
Mr. Mandaza, we're going to have Mr.
For inviting me. Survey that you mentioned was done over a year ago, and it presented a snapshot of support to political parties at that time. Having said that, you also have to bear in mind that there was a lot of people that were not willing to say who they're going to vote. Now, definitely coming into these elections, was support to MDCs smaller or bigger than before? We can argue that yes, probably it's smaller because if nothing else, at least from our perspective, big part of people that in 2008 casted their vote against Mugabe were not necessarily doing that now. Having said this, first and foremost, these elections were not free, nor fair, nor credible. And we, as an organization, have been pointing out over the last 6 months or so that elections are not going to be nor free nor fair. There are 3 reasons for that. First one, reforms that were supposed to be done through Government of National Unity and that were predicted as GPA were not done. Secondly, the registration process was complete shame.
Right.
You know, and third thing was that this, and we are talking about snap elections.
They were very quickly
They were very quickly put together, and I would say, fourth, and probably the most important thing, there was significant amount of repression against civil society organizations and MDC, and they were not allowed, as in the run-up to 2008 elections, to freely operate.
Now, let me get Mr. Mandaza to weigh in on that. Do you agree at all with what Mr. Petrovic is saying in terms of how the process leading up to the elections just completely did not allow or accommodate a free and fair outcome?
Beg your pardon?
Well, I'm not sure if you heard much of what Mr. Petrovic was saying, but basically that
the process wasn't clear to me
the process leading up to the election itself didn't really leave room for many to conclude that it was free and fair in the first place. But I want to just move on a little bit, Mr. Mandaza, and ask you, what do you predict will be happening now within the next few months, within the next few years? Is there going to be at least some transition that we should expect?
No, I think first of all we need to consider the extent to which the ZANU-PF and the state have used the Freedom House survey to justify the results. We are always suspicious about that. The Freedom House thing was not only flawed, but very dangerous politically.
Now, Mr. Mandaza, there were other surveys too. You know, basically agreeing.
But they were methodologically flawed. Let's make that clear. Because basically in politics there are no surprises. There's no swing between elections of 20 to 30%. It's not possible, especially given that the election was largely about Mugabe.
Mr. Mandaza, what about the fact that Mr. Tsvangirai likely lost some support over the last few years? Some pointed at
it's politically improbable. That may be true. That you would have a swing in the heartland of the anti-Mugabe area, take Bulawayo, a swing of 13% to Mugabe. That's improbable. Right. Likewise, in Macedonian South, a swing of 12%.
Let me get a last word in here from Mr. Petrovic.
Right, and I absolutely agree with Ibbo about this. For us, what is very unbelievable and hard to get is that this time around Mugabe got 1 million more votes than in 2008, effectively doubled. And as Ibbo said, that is not happening overnight, and that is not happening that easily. So that is, again, one of the factors or one of the indications that tells us that there was something wrong with these elections, because it's not just compared to 2008, but it's compared to all previous elections that Mugabe and ZANU-PF almost doubled their votes. Suddenly says that something is wrong.
Something's wrong. Well, thank you so much. Thanks again for the insights of Mr. Vukasin Petrovic, Freedom House here in Washington, and Ibbo Mandaza with Suppers Trust in Harare, Zimbabwe.